I'm only going to give them another minute.
Peter, would you do me a favor while we're waiting, so that I can make sure I put a link to the right one? Would you send me what you sent to the board as the revisions around the mission authorities document that went out yesterday?
A link, or you want me to just drop the document in?
Or if you would drop it in on the chat box here, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have so many versions floating around. I want to make sure that it's the one that everybody has.
This is it's actually came from you, composition of roles and
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I'll drop it in there now.
Don't laugh too hard, Mark. Come on now. You're on mute, which is just fine. You can stay there with that comment, I think. I don't know.
All right. Well, maybe while we're waiting on them, I'm going to share screen. I received a number of suggestions. So cadence of these meetings, and Peggy Lynch, I see you're here. Glad you're here, and we'll keep the chat open if you want to share anything. And because we only have an hour public comment, actually DSL is organized to have full meeting. I think it's an hour. Jeff, do you want to speak to that? Dedicated, focused on that?
We have posted on the website a link to a Zoom meeting that we'll have for conversation with any members of the public that are interested on the working group work and updates. And that'll happen every Tuesday at 4 o'clock for an hour, from 4 to 5, starting this coming Tuesday. So.
All right. So I took all the edits that suggested edits I got, and we're gonna, for cadence of the of these meetings, we'll take the topic we discussed at the previous meeting, revisit that, try to bring resolution to the extent possible on that, and then we will bring up a new set of topics. So on this one, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the consolidated set of comments that I received include Mark's, Melissa's, and Paul Beck, yours, I believe, are the folks that responded. Melissa's actually are going to show up, some of them as Melissa here, where I've done a full copy and paste. Others are just in red and will show up as Microsoft user. That's me. And I will ask folks, so on item number 2, I'm trying to track who else coming in. I see Keith is here now.
And Melissa will be here momentarily. We were at the Google Meets link on my calendar. So we were sitting there talking, going, my God, it started already. Where is everybody?
Oh, heavens. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I should know better. I try to remember that, but I don't always. You got to disable it. So we're just talking through the edits, suggestions to the mission and authorities piece that I received. These include Melissa's. Welcome, Melissa, Mark's, and Paul Beck's. Melissa, sorry about the Google Meets.
Keith and I were just hanging out there. We were having a nice talk. He's on his way too.
Yeah, he's here too. He just arrived. So item 2. Mark, do you want to say a little bit about what your thought is? Here, I believe this first one on item 2 was yours.
Yeah, well, I guess I just said
put as to be determined whether or not there's an affiliation or a connection to any existing state agency or to the land board. And to me, that's still sort of an open question. And, you know, I go back to what Dimitri said on September 22nd. I suppose there's various interpretations of what he said, but I don't think he precluded that by any means.
Okay. Any responses from the group? Are you proposing that, Mark, that this be the actual language here be changed, or that we revisit it as needed based on sort of what the structure ends up being?
Probably the latter. I would just flag it now as a place that to be sorted out.
Okay. Any other comments or questions related to that specific piece? Okay. And Paul, you commented on this one that you think it's important that it not be a part of an existing state agency. Do you want to speak to your thinking there? Paul Beck.
Just that we're creating something new, and I think the baggage that other agencies may or may not have wouldn't add to that. So I think it's a fresh start.
Okay. Well, this all will evolve through our conversations here. Melissa, on item 3, it actually shows up as a complete overhaul of the sentence from you, with also comments both from Mark and Paul. Melissa, yours wasn't a complete overhaul. You modified the language, but when I transferred it over, it showed up as a rewrite. Do you want to speak to what you were trying to do with your modifications here on item 3?
I was just really seeking clarity and trying to make it clear that, you know, board approval would be necessary to do any of that. I personally think my edit is brilliant.
That was a good one. Any, I'm going to ask it this way. Anybody have any problems with Melissa's suggested language, which now appears in red?
I don't have any problem with it. I guess my question was, if you go down below, there's another section about authorities, and a similar line is in there. So I wasn't sure what was trying to be achieved in this bullet number 3 that we're looking at, as opposed to bullet, down in there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it's item number 1 here.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you want to speak to that? Or Katie?
So the difference between the mission and the establishment, I guess I'm gonna speak to it only in the context that, just to, as a reminder that we're on things like this, maybe less than the mission stuff. We're not gonna, the language we craft may not be the final language that goes into a bill. The legislative council is going to draft something based on what we give them. So some of this might be ironed out there. And we were looking at a template from the Willamette Falls and a couple of other public entities, and they had establishment language and mission separated out, and I can see that there's totally overlap, and I can't answer it any better than that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, much of what we craft in orders, legislative council will likely rework to fit the statutory framework they want to use.
Yeah, and they have a template for bill drafts that they plug stuff into. So some of this will, they'll have to decide where things go and why.
And then Paul, you had suggested sort of public, the opportunity to maintain the ability to contract with non-public, I think, and public entities.
Yeah, wherever the template allows it, it needs to be in there. We
Yes.
need to have that flexibility. And it doesn't really matter to me where it gets put. But, different agencies or different parts of the state government have the ability to contract with private folks. And I would hate to lose that.
No, that is an important piece we have to make sure is in, both because of the capacity for reduce overhead, but also just because of contracting for timber harvests and road maintenance and things like that. So.
Good. Moving on, suggestion to add governance. I believe, Mark, this came from you. Mission of a public entity is to establish ownership, oversight, governance, and management.
I was just struggling with what does oversight really mean? I mean, it's a nice word, but it's pretty vague at the same time. And then I sort of went to governance, and I was trying to figure out, in some ways, like accountability is what we're looking for, but without messing with that sentence further, I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. And again, oversight is what got me thinking. I mean, what is oversight? That's somewhat nondescript in terms of what you actually do.
Governance has more teeth.
Yeah, I'm with that too. I think oversight is pretty nebulous. And I would see what legislative council prefers there. Maybe they like nebulous language, but I would imagine not. And I think that replacing oversight with governance makes good sense. Ownership, governance, and management is a fair trilogy to work with.
Anybody have a problem with it? Consider it done. Melissa, your suggestion on number 4 was promoting recreational access opportunities in the use of as well as, I believe, Mark, you suggested adding and biodiversity values. Any concerns with adding these two? Okay, hearing nothing, I'm going to accept them. And I will say, nobody is agreeing in 10 yet to any of this. You're all going to have a chance to revisit it based on the rest of our conversations together today and the rest of this month. So item 5, Mark, you've made a few suggestions here contributing significantly to conservation, the research, protecting, and recovering of at-risk species, and then adding scientifically informed. Any elaboration you'd like to offer, Mark, and any questions or concerns from the group in adding these?
I was just going back to some of the conversations we had. I think Bob Van Dyke in particular sort of led this one initially, making it the part of the point of the forest was not just to sort of maintain coho species, but to work to recover them and increase their population viability. So I was looking at language that just kind of gave some reinforcement to the idea that it's the hope and the intent is to make those at-risk species do better over time.
And I would note that there have been suggestions added to item 8, which provide sort of a corresponding reinforcement of the timber, the harvest component of this as well. So I'll put those up together if I can. Any concerns with accepting the suggested edits to or additions to item 5? Okay. Item 7, Melissa, you added a clause here at the end, as well as providing opportunities for tribal governments and tribal members to harvest traditional forest products and engage in traditional tribal practices. Any concerns with adding that?
It seems like it belongs in 6, not 7.
Yeah, I'd think if you have that in 7, then 6 is redundant. You can eliminate 6.
Okay. We will figure that out where it belongs, but no concerns with adding it.
No.
In the
I
spirit
think
of
I
time,
had it
I'm
in,
gonna-
just
Okay.
to clarify what it's meant to do. It's just meant to allow tribal members to collect things like grasses, camas roots, all that kind of thing, just for traditional tribal practices.
And it may well have been put into item 6, and I translated it into item 7 incorrectly. So we got it where it goes, where it belongs. Item 8, which I mentioned previously, related to working forest products. Any concerns with the additions here? And any elaboration that Paul, you'd want to offer?
No, there needs to be balance. The environmental concerns are significant. The sustainable wood supply is significant. So
I don't think we need the as identified in number 3 above. I mean,
Okay.
we're not referencing back in each one of these because we could do that. We could do that in all of these or none of them. I don't think it. Are we using significant up above with species? I generally don't like that language, regardless of where.
Yes.
Contributing significantly to conservation.
All right, then keep them both.
If Mark gets a significantly, Paul gets a significantly.
the only reason
Well, but I guess part of harvest was supposed to not be driven by targets or by revenue. I mean, we were pretty clear about that in the original research platform.
we were also pretty clear about the fact that this forest is going to pay for itself.
That's item 9. You've added financially self-sufficient. I'll probably eliminate the bold and highlight, but I left it in for the time being for your benefit. Bob Salinger, can you live with it?
I gotta think a little bit about it. I want to go back to the language that's in the platform and see what's there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Financially self-sufficient, though. I agree with that, but I also think, well, I mean, I want to really understand what we're paying for. You know, how much of the research are we actually covering? Are we covering the research's salaries? What research are we covering? You know, I mean, research is usually grant funded or funded through other sources. I don't think it's necessarily realistic to expect the forest to pay for OSU research staff and that kind of stuff. So it's one thing to have the platform in place for researchers to come and do their research. It's another thing to be paying the researchers. So I think there are some big questions there.
I agree.
Peter, 2 comments. One is on this topic, you might take a look at the guiding principles document that the advisory committee worked through. And that's incorporated. And then I think I also sent out the portion of the OSU proposal that addresses each of these items. So take a look at the language there.
Should be close at hand for you, Bob.
Yeah, I think it should be.
And as needed, we can revisit this at our next Friday meeting or between.
But I just want to keep flagging that, you know, I think Paul and I are on the same page here. As to, we've got to put some boundaries on what that self-sufficiency goes to.
Okay.
And also, you know, is that an annual self-sufficiency? I think I get what we're after there, but I think it raises a ton of questions without the detail that we need to really understand what we're committing ourselves to.
Is there a phrase that works, Bob, that is not self-sufficient, financially whatever? Self-sufficient, I agree, is desire, I mean, it's desired in that the forest has to help pay for itself, but I agree with both you and Paul that you start talking, does that mean you're paying for every research dollar? And that's not the intent, because that's not the intent with research anywhere anymore.
Well, and what drives what too? I mean, OSU wants to build a big facility that's, you know, I forget what the number was, but it was like 16 or 17 million dollars. So it was a big facility. So does the desire drive the budget, or does the budget control the desire on something like that, for example? You know, what does it mean to live within your means? Because you can always up the cut to raise more money, at least on a short-term basis. So, you know, I think, again, just sort of understanding better how those decisions are going to be made. I think we can leave the language for right now, but I think we need to really flag it that we need to have some definition around what that means somewhere else.
Agreed, and I added a note there.
Thanks.
Again, with the spirit of moving on here and getting to the next set of topics, wanted to give a chance for item 10. Several people commented on this. Mark, you provided the initial. So Melissa, you added economic opportunities. Any concerns with accepting that? Okay, so I'm gonna accept that. And then Mark, do you want to say what your initial, sort of your comment or question here was?
Well, you know, I heard the conversation last week with Bob, Keith, and Melissa, and I guess I thought, at least, Melissa, I'm not quite sure where you landed, but Bob and Keith were both acknowledging that it was a statewide asset. And we had language last week, including the two counties, you know, residents of Oregon, including the two counties, just making it clear that it's, you know, we're trying to do this for the benefit of all Oregonians.
But with a specific call out to Coos and Douglas County residents.
I think the word including is weird. I mean, I do remember that conversation, and I appreciate you making that edit. I just think the word including is weird because clearly Coos and Douglas counties are part of Oregon.
And I think you cover that in
Can we say with a priority on?
I think that's covered, Melissa, and really in the what looks to be the proposed makeup of the advisory committee with Coos and Douglas County representation, and all other Oregon counties are left out. I mean, I think that clearly that kind of establishes that Coos and Douglas County have a privilege here that at the table that other Oregon counties don't necessarily have. But here I like just the residents of Oregon. It's I think it's simpler, elegant. I'm fine with leaving it in, but I think we do hit that note.
Melissa,
or we potentially hit that note in the makeup of the advisory committee.
I just disagree. There's a big difference between the enabling legislation and the advisory committee. So to me, it's not enough. And I don't know that I love the advisory committee anyway. I need to understand more about what exactly its purpose would be versus the board. So I'd love to see some prioritization for.
So I'm going to highlight this.
Douglas.
I'm going to highlight this so we can come back to it, but after we've had the board conversation, and we'll revisit it. And Jeff, I know you got stuff we need to get to, and Katie, so we'll do that. Forest products added to item, and Mark, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know you had more to say on that.
No, I'm good with words. Park for the moment.
Okay, parking lot. Forest products added to item 11. Let me know if you have concerns, speak up.
I guess here I question the laundry list because I could keep adding to it. But
okay, then I'm going to highlight it. Just that last clause there, instead of students and public knowledge, is there value in delineating these or not? And with approval of the board, corollary to Melissa's addition above, Hearing no concerns. And then finally, I think this is Mark. You added the sale of other ecosystem services. You know, speak briefly to that.
Well, it sort of comes out of carbon because that's what carbon is. And then I'm not sure I've thought this next part all the way through and if I actually like it or not. But, you know, over time, you know, maybe somebody's paying for more clean water to come off the Elliott or.
Yeah.
So that in the section in the blue, Mark, is specifically carbon related? Is that what you said?
Well, I think carbon is an example of an ecosystem service benefit that is
Okay.
being bought and sold, and there could be others over time. I could say I could live to regret that as well. So I'm a little I'm thinking out loud with that phrase there. I'm not.
Yeah. So the
I agree.
origin of this particular piece was just to make sure that there was no misunderstanding that there was authority of the board and the entity to enter into markets for the sale of things other than timber if it was desired to do that and consistent with the mission, mainly because that hasn't been done by a public entity in Oregon before. And so there was the suggestion from DOJ that we call that out specifically. And I'll stop there. How you decide to do it is fine, but that's the underlying purpose of it being there.
Yeah, I see that. I think it's just singular on carbon the way it's written, and so I was just pondering
Okay.
it should include potentially other things as well. I don't have a lot of heartburn about that one way or another, but
No, I think that in that regard, if you can word it correctly, I don't, and I like I like the next sentence as, you know, that to be the in purple, to go along with this Mark's sentence in blue, while ensuring the creation of traditional forest products as well. But in that regard, Mark, thanks. I see, I can.
So Mark, I'm gonna accept your suggestion here and leave you the right to withdraw it.
First right of refusal.
I think at this point, I'd probably just delete the whole thing and just cross those bridges when we get to them.
Okay. All right. Since you put it in, you get the right to take it out. Somebody else can
Well,
add it back in.
The other half of that was mine.
Oh,
And before we take it out, there are those folks that would just as soon sell carbon credits and nothing else. And
we
I
heard
don't
that
wanna-
comment last time.
I don't want to go there.
yeah. So I'm gonna just highlight this, and we've got now half of our time to focus on the other reason we're here today. So I'll save it the way it is for now, and I'm gonna pull up the next document to tee up. Can you see this next document?
Not yet.
Okay. So Jeff, as I pull this up, do you want to do an introduction here to sort of the mission and authority? Sorry, I put you. You're on mute. Take me just a sec.
You're about to go to the board composition.
That's correct.
Discussion.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know that there's a lot of framing to be done. I think we put the questions in because we wanted to gather input from you on how you're feeling about the last time the governance discussion happened. Oregon State was going to own the forest, and so there wasn't a board of directors contemplated. It was really focused on an advisory body to the university and to the college. So we first began to frame questions about how you feel about the advisory committee in relationship to a board of directors structure, and then questions that need to be answered around the composition of a board of directors and the appointment process for that. And we decided to really just frame this conversation to collect your thinking and let you talk about it. And then we'll go back and frame things up a little bit more directly, like we did on the missions and authorities the first time through. Give you something to push against or discuss next time.
Katie, anything you'd add?
No, Jeff did a good job explaining it.
All right, here it is. So I think I'm gonna not make you look at this the whole time, but just to tee this up, I think one of there's a series of questions here. One of the big ones and an initial one that some of you have already shared some thoughts on: should the legislation establish an advisory committee, or should it simply provide the authority for a board of directors to establish committees as appropriate, including but not limited to an advisory committee? And I know some of you have weighed in on this. Anybody want to kind of kick the conversation off with your thoughts and perspectives on this?
I think I suggested that the legislation included advisory committee. That was always our intent. And if I have no problems with the board. In fact, I like that, but it has always been the intent in our 2 years of discussion here that there'd be an advisory committee. And I think that to memorialize that in the legislation makes sense in the sense that none of us know what an advisory committee may decide, or excuse me, what a board of directors may decide in terms of committee creation.
And Keith, if I can push you a little bit on your thinking there, in part related to the question that Melissa posed, what would you see as the delineation of roles and responsibilities between the board versus an advisory committee?
I think that's I laid that out when I sent my comments in today too. I think we have to be really careful in terms of defining what those roles and responsibilities are, and forgive my poor comparison here, but you've got strategy and tactics, right, at a military level, and some are, and those are include. I think the advisory committee is going to deal with more practical suggestions on the ground, in a sense, and the board would deal with policy, and that's the way I would see that. And good boards establish policy and get out of the way, right? And we've all served on good boards and not so great boards, and boards that want to micromanage. But I think that the critical element is a board that allows the advisory committee to do the work, or do a lot of the recommendation for work on the ground.
Other thoughts and reactions to that?
And I didn't see Melissa's comments earlier.
And maybe most specifically, sort of the need to address the existence of an advisory committee in legislation. I didn't hear anybody questioning whether there would be the need for an advisory committee of sorts, or the potential need for an advisory committee, but whether you need to do it in statute.
I guess I'm looking at this differently than Keith. I think if you've got a board with the proper mix of folks, you don't really need an advisory committee. I just think it gets too complicated. It's too big. So I would opt for a bigger board, similar to the committee that we have now, but actually with the authority to actually do things and make decisions. And we all have advisory committees. We name our own advisory committees, whether it's my wife or my daughter or the people I work with or used to work with. I think naming an advisory committee that has no real authority, taking that all the way up to the governor or the senate or whatever it seems a bit cumbersome.
Melissa or Bob? Melissa, you had weighed in on this one. I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I saw Bob was coming off mute, so I want to give him a chance too.
Oh, I'm not uncomfortable at all. I wrote my comments down. I think,
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody had a chance to read them, but yeah, I think Paul and I are kind of on the same page here. It just seems a little cumbersome. Every board I've ever been on has had the ability to form committees if it chooses to or decides it needs to. This is still, there's going to be a lot of need to be nimble and flexible in the first 10 years. And I would really like to see us, if we're recommending a board, to give that board the scope and the authority to do the things they need to do to make this work. And if that means they need to establish 12 different advisory committees, each one with a different area that they're focused on, they should have the power to do that.
One difference that I was curious whether you might speak to, Paul suggested a larger board so as to be more similarly reflective as our current advisory committee construct. You had suggested, I think, something closer to the much more smaller in number, maybe not in terms of representation. Do you have thoughts about that you want to share?
Yeah, I just think large boards are unwieldy, and the larger the board gets, the less people feel like they have actual authority, and it gets really difficult to get attendance the way that you need to.
And I concur. That's why one of the reasons I had a 2-tiered structure. I think when the notes I sent in today, I suggested a board with 5 to 7 members and an advisory committee, largely like the advisory committee that we've been working with. But I agree with Melissa that large boards become unwieldy.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I'm undecided at this point. I'm really struggling with where accountability is going to lie. In the original premise, it was going to lie with OSU, and you got an advisory board that could kind of advise up to OSU, but you knew where the buck stopped and who was truly going to be responsible. Under this proposal, I don't really know that, because frankly, an independent entity, if it turns out to be truly an independent entity with an appointed board, is a relatively unaccountable structure. And I'm not sure whether the accountability comes from above, from the state, or from below with an advisory committee. But right now, I feel like we're kind of floating out there in space in terms of where the accountability lies. And I don't have confidence in an independent board, a la the Locks Commission. I care a lot about the lower Willamette. I never deal with the Locks Commission. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so I don't know yet. I think we'd be better served by talking about the board and coming back to the committee at some point. We do have a committee structure in place that we can fall back on it later on if we feel we truly need it and to delineate it.
Bob, one of the things Melissa is experienced with this. Oregon has 2 international ports, the International Port of Coos Bay and the International Port of Portland. And those are board of directors that are appointed by the governor, and responsibility falls to the board, right? That's pretty clear. So that's sort of the kind of the vision I have for the board.
And you couldn't have given a more problematic example. I agree with you. Unfortunately, I have a 30-year relationship with the Port of Portland.
I agree with you there.
And I would tell you, I think the Port of Portland Commission is utterly unaccountable to the general public. I've been on record on that for 30 years, saying they are a untouchable, unaccountable entity. So,
well, my experience, I was using them as an experience as a governor-appointed position. I have a little greater experience with the Port of Coos Bay, of course, and Melissa even more so than I. And but that's okay. Well made, touche.
The problem with an appointed board like that, that's smaller and in all likelihood would be made up of political appointments, is they wouldn't have a clue of what we've already decided. So we're going to have to spend a couple of years teaching them what what our vision of this forest is. I really think that this committee needs to morph into that board, because we won't need training. Bob knows what I think, and I know what Bob thinks, or I think I do anyway. We've communicated for 3 years about this. You don't have to teach us, and anybody that we appoint on a board like that, we're going to have to train them as to what decisions we've made and why. And I just think that's a waste of time.
So let me bucket that, Paul, as a good point, and I think as we're probably going to need to have 2 conversations, right? You need to have set the structure as you think this board needs to exist and operate, and there's going to need to be a conversation about a bridging entity or a period of time while things get underway, sort of interim, leadership component of this potentially that gets you from this advisory committee process through the legislation and up and running. And there's probably some continuity that everybody would benefit from in continued engagement for those that are willing to remain engaged from the current structure. So I think it's an important point and a topic that we need to talk about is what do you do on this interim time period? And we still need to figure out long-term, what is the right board structure, leadership structure for this entity and for the Elliott. Each of you, I'm curious if others want to weigh in on this. Each of you that's spoken so far on it, I think, and I don't think I've heard any concerns about it, has said governor appointed. Is anybody, and we've spoken about that at length in our previous governance discussions, is anybody concerned about a governor appointed approach?
No, as long as there's some sort of bumper system that is included in the legislation.
So the bumper system, I'm imagining, Keith, that you're referring to is the one we've spoken about previously, which would provide for the board and the previous conversation, the advisory committee member opportunities to suggest replacements at points of transition. Is that correct?
I think mine is more that if you have a board that is simply at governor's that at the governor's control, in the sense that they can appoint whoever they want, then at some point we're going to lose this process that we've developed of open communication, or you could. What I'm suggesting is, if you're going to have that board, that there is a position that is, or 2 positions that are related to conservation interests, and 2 positions that are related to timber interests, and a position that's related to Douglas County and Coos County, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, so it isn't, I'm concerned that I don't want to give this simply to any governor and say, pick the 12 people you want, or whatever that number is.
Right.
Because
right.
That's where I think we lose touch with the process that we've all been going through for a long time.
Well, I'm just curious about having the state land board appoint the folks rather than just the governor.
I'm good. That's I live with that.
Others?
Does the state land board appoint any other boards?
I would have to look at the South SLU legislation.
They're appointed by the governor. There might be a recommendation that comes from.
Okay. Bill, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, we don't,
Oddly unwieldy.
or they don't, not as a land board.
Right. It just seems oddly unwieldy whenever you're working with that 3-part elected official entity, because any discussion that would be had about
Finding some fish recipes.
Shut
Okay.
up.
For fish.
Sorry.
Fish taco. for Food Network. 38 minutes.
Supper time.
I don't know why he's talking. Sorry.
Sent a phone.
Siri.
We all like fish tacos, Melissa. Thank you. So,
But I think your point was well made. Fish tacos notwithstanding, that it's a bit of a potentially an unwieldy construct. And I actually saw, Bob, your head going up and down that you might have agreed with the thought that could be unwieldy. Peggy Lynch has weighed into that maybe the Oregon Science Trust could be appointed by, maybe, not sure, but DSL team, maybe you can do a little digging into this and get back to us.
So
Bob,
Peggy's right, though. The land board does appoint 5 voting members to the OOST.
there you have it. There is precedent. Peggy,
I just know how difficult it is for the 3-member board of commissioners to appoint people because all those discussions have to happen in public. And it can be uncomfortable for people to have their application discussed in public.
Yeah, the quorum issue comes up a fair amount on how to structure conversations, just in my short time thinking about the land board.
and with a 3-person board, that 2 people can constitute a public meeting and discussion. So,
Yeah.
Bob, I mean, are you throwing it out there as an idea? I mean, what's your motivation behind? I mean, talk to us about why that would matter, why the governor wouldn't be okay.
I wasn't suggesting the governor wouldn't be okay. I guess
Okay.
I'm still trying to figure out what the nexus is between this earlier issue I raised. What's the nexus between this and the state? Where does this really embed in the state?
And is the appointment process the means by which to establish that, or are there other vehicles that you're contemplating where you might do that?
I mean, to me, it makes some sense to keep this ultimately under the land board, not necessarily under DSL in an agency, but keeping it under the land board, having a board connected back up to them. So they're kind of the final, that's where it links back into the public. And then, so I was just playing around with that idea, I guess. I think if the land board becomes sort of the ultimate connection back to the state, it may make some sense to have the land board be the appointing entity, but I'm also pretty comfortable with the idea of the governor.
And related to if you all were to decide to move forward with the governor appointed, I've heard differing opinions about Senate confirmation or not, and I wanted to briefly touch base on that. I several people saying no, and I've heard others say that might be helpful. So for those that are vigorously saying don't do it, Paul, Bob, I think you're the most vigorous at this point.
And we agree.
Yes. One of
No.
you say why.
What Bob said.
You want to talk about the most hyper political process there is. I think throwing it to the Senate becomes just a huge opportunity for politics to really creep into this and to get caught up in that appointment process and everything that goes on there. I just don't think I don't think it's been an efficient way of getting people appointed per se.
Why would we want to try and create something that is functioning by funneling it through something that is dysfunctional?
He said.
So this isn't being recorded, is it?
Yes, it is.
You don't want to offend the Senate?
My existence might offend them.
You're retired.
So those that thought it might be helpful, or anybody want to argue in favor of the idea of Senate confirmation?
Sure, I will.
Yeah.
I think I like it because it contributes towards that system of checks and balances. That way there's an opportunity, the person's there in public, they're answering questions. It gives them a chance to be more fully vetted before they're put on the board.
Mark?
Well, I think in the perfect world, I agree entirely with you, Melissa. I watched what the Board of Forestry went through the last few years, and that was just chaos trying to finally get people approved. So I think the Senate makes it really more politicized. But I don't know what the answer is exactly. I get the checks and balances, but it hasn't been particularly functional lately.
I think there's people in rural Oregon, though, that would be concerned about just, the governor just appointing, regardless of who the governor is, just having all that power in one person to make the decisions.
I mean, are there
So,
other ways?
Appointing.
Sorry, Melissa, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm wondering if there are other ways. I mean, it sounds like the accountability piece is what you think is important, not necessarily that it's the Senate specifically. And I wonder if there are other ways to think about sort of the added layer that would provide some measure of assurance, whether that's, I don't know, governor appointed, land board confirmed, or some other way for vetting. What?
We could make it an elected position, statewide elected. No, I'm sure there are. I mean, we can all think about it.
I mean, the land board would get, it's kind of what I was getting at earlier. The land board would give us a little bit of a broader thing than just the governor, but not kick it to the legislature. I think it gets back to something Paul was talking about earlier about state, trying to keep it with a body of people, whether it's the board or whatever the state connection is, that actually might have some understanding of what we're actually trying to do. I think once it gets to the legislature, the idea of connecting back to the vision that we've created here is going to be totally lost. Then it just becomes individual turf, and the idea that the legislators are going to be really looking back to what the purpose of the research forest is, I think is unlikely. It's too complex and esoteric. So I think it just throws it into a purely political arena at that point.
More to come. Katie, Jeff, other key topics you guys were wanting to tee up for the group? We've got just a couple of minutes here. I want to just make sure, tip of the iceberg on any topics that, composition would be one, it's overall size. We've had a smattering of conversation, and then I think some direction from the group on what would be helpful for the team to bring back to you for next time. So Katie, you came off mute.
Oh, no, I don't have any initial thoughts on that. My car alarm's going off, so I actually need to address that. That's why I was coming off mute. So I'm going to be right back.
Your
neighbors will take you.
I think from our perspective, it doesn't have to be right now, but tagging on to this discussion of composition and appointment process, of having a real good delineation of roles and responsibilities of the board. And I think we got some good feedback informally in emails that came in shortly before the meeting, but more would be good.
Agreed. And for the team, would it be helpful if a couple of us put our heads together, maybe Katie, Jeff, and myself, to begin to flesh some of this out as a draft or a set of, something a little bit more concrete for you to, based on this conversation, flesh out a few options or concepts here?
I think that works, and you guys have a pretty good work, Katie. That was fast. So
I'm not sure I fixed it, but I'm too far away. But We only have a few minutes left, so.
So the neighbors don't care. So I think you guys have a great handle on where we're going, or the kind of the nexus of this discussion. And if you want to bring a framework back to us, I don't have a problem with that. And there's, with the understanding that there's probably parts that we're going to go, no, let's change that part. But that works for me.
And if there are others, if any of you want to join in that or take that on, we'd welcome that too. I think if somebody wanted to take the pen and say, here's what I would do, we'd welcome that, or join into the conversation. If you have the time, that'd be great.
Mhm.
I just add, and sorry, maybe you all talked about this, I think when we're looking at the board, at least the makeup of the board, I think two of the big issues is size, which I think in looking at the comments and the discussion today, there seems to be like some broad opinions on size. And then the second is, do you have slots or not? Like, do you have assigned positions, or is it at the discretion or some sort of descriptor? It's done in statute a bunch of different ways. So I think those are the two input items.
Yeah, thanks
Katie,
for
on
that
that-
second one, Katie. That's important, and I neglected to mention it.
Mark?
So on that, I think, Katie, for me, I like the two-tiered structure. And so I think that in terms of size, it's dependent on if you are one tier or two tier. If you have simply a single advisory board, and it's not an advisory committee, and you have a board to run the Elliott, then that's going to be larger, I think, because there's going to be more voices. If it's an advisory committee to a board, then I think you have a larger advisory committee and a smaller board. Is the way I would see that. And I like the idea on both, that there is that's the bumper system I was talking about, that there's direction in terms of this position is related to this level of expertise or involvement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are you thinking, Keith, broadly, or, designated for each person, or broad expertise that committee members
I think it would be
collectively should
both.
have?
So if we're talking about, in the document we saw that came to us, I thought that you had a board and an advisory committee. An advisory committee, there was a delegate either of the Douglas County and Coos County Board of Commissioners or their designee, and that there was somebody coming from the educational field, and that there was two people, or that were people from the conservation field and the timber interests. I like that a lot in terms of laying out what a committee structure would look, pretty much what we've done with this committee for the last number of years, right? That it's tried to be very well representative of a variety of interests and positions.
Okay.
I think I would do that even on the board. If there's a board above that, I think I would do that as well. Because if there's a board above that, it would be ultimately sort of the responsible party. And I think you want to structure that in a way that it can't be slanted one way or the other.
Thanks, Keith. Mark? And I'm aware that we're over time, so if people have to go, feel free to sign out. Next week, we're going to try to talk about accountability. We'll revisit this topic and talk about accountability. So Mark, on this topic, and again, if you got to go.
I guess just quickly, I think it's a little bit the horse and the cart, and which comes first. And for me, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what are the responsibilities of the board and how's that going to interact with OSU, and what's the role of the managing director. And once we flush that out, then I think that informs a little bit more who and how big a board you might want to have. But to me, that's sort of the purpose and the function of the board, but we haven't, that's still somewhat vague to me in terms of how that's going to roll. So that's sort of where my thoughts go on it for the moment.
That's great. And maybe we can tee that up for next time and solicit your input between, I'll maybe give you each a phone call. Jeff, did you have some?
I was just going to say, I would like to have some input on the thinking of individual members about that before we kind of come back to next week. Doesn't have to be extensive, but a little bit informally would be helpful, I think, to Katie and I.
Good. One thing before we sign off for the day, or I guess two things. First and foremost, a thank you. Yeah, Bob, he's visiting his son in the next week, so that was why I suggested accountability for next week. But I think so Bob, we'll make sure to circle with you beforehand and after, regardless of what the topic is. We won't keep you out, I promise. So thank you all for the time. And these are really brief. We, the between meeting conversations that we can try to have by phone with each of you is helpful. We may, as we get closer, further into the month, I just sense we're gonna need more time. An hour is so constrained on this. So if it's okay, I'd love to try to get a little more time on your calendars adjacent to this, or another slot or two during the week. It feels like it's, we're going to get to crunch time. So is that all right? Anybody have any concerns with that? And Peggy, I see your request that materials to the public when they go to the group. Yeah. So we will make sure that's happening. We're getting in a groove here, just getting this off the ground, and duly noted on that.
Yeah, I would just say, Peter, I support that. It'd be great to get those things on the calendar. I think especially as we get down to the pinch point for legislation, we should schedule some big blocks. As you're well aware, we just scheduled 7 8-hour days for OFPA, which is kind of on the same timeline. So I don't think we need that kind of focus on it, but I think to pull this all together at the end is going to take some long, brutal days. And I don't want to try and pull those up at the last minute, because I think most of us probably won't be able to.
No, so I'm thinking, we'll try to add a couple chunks over the next few weeks if we can, or add a half hour to these meetings, and then in late October, early November, we're going to need a couple of half-day blocks with you, would be my hope. So respond to the doodle. We'll try to make it as simple as possible, and apologize in advance for making you do another doodle poll, yet one more, but it is important. Final thoughts?
Thank you. We got a lot that we can work with based on this hour, and we'll turn around some materials and have more conversations between now and next Friday.
Anybody want to join the drafting group? Paul?
Really fun.
Me too.
Good. We're gonna schedule it, and we'll try to schedule around you. Otherwise, we'll circulate drafts to folks as appropriate. But we'll be working between meetings to get stuff teed up for you. Paul Beck, you mentioned at one point, and it's sort of related to the advisory committee board construct, executive committee being something to think about as well. So I wanted to put that in the hopper for folks to be thinking about over the next week as well.
I think Keith and Melissa both said that, big boards are unwieldy. And my thought is a big board becomes a small board. The world is run by those that show up. And the idea of shrinking what we have down, I just can't imagine kicking some people off the group or taking away the representation. I just don't think we're going to get away with that. So anyway, I like an executive committee idea. Every board I've been involved with has one. they're active. So that's something to throw into the mix.
Thanks, Paul. All right. Have a good weekend, I guess. There we are.
Fish tacos, everybody.
Yeah.
I've got the recipes. I'll send them to you, clearly.
Great.
Party at Melissa's in an hour, so.
Just don't abuse Siri anymore, okay?
She was clearly listening in. Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care,